Good morning, guys. We're ready to talk a little bit about the federal budget process this morning. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint to walk you through the basic steps. In terms of the federal budget, we kind of need to understand that this is how the U.S. government effectively puts in place its fiscal policy, which we'll talk about more detail in the next video. Fiscal policy is just the use of taxing and spending primarily to achieve stability in the broader macroeconomy. So before we can look at those policy options, we have to first understand the process by which the federal budget is designed. Okay, so let me get set here. I'm gonna embed my face, get rid of that, but this is where we'll begin our day together. So first and foremost, in understanding the federal budget, I want you guys to understand, there we go, how the budget is decided. Okay, you need to know right off the bat that this is a long, fairly drawn out process that takes about 18 months. And we're usually doing this ahead of the budget year for which we're designing a spending plan. You need to make a note that if we don't start the fiscal year on October the 1st for the federal budget with a plan in place, we cannot pass go. We cannot proceed to normal daily functions. So you could expect something like a government shutdown. Anytime there's a gap in funding at the federal level, Congress has to decide what to do. So we hear a lot of wrangling over stopgap funding, which is supposed to fill in the gaps when they occur. So it's possible that you might hear about government shutdowns at other times of the year. But we really need this plan in place by October the 1st. So you should know from that then, we look backwards to how long it takes to get this document done, we're usually planning about 1 to 2 years ahead of time. The president's job is to basically have this done in February. So you probably will hear more discussion over spending, especially given light of the current crisis we're facing. Hopefully we will have all of that wrangled out so that we start with a fully functioning federal government on October 1st of this year. So very first thing that happens, OMB, guys, that's an abbreviation for Office of Management and Budget. They receive spending proposals from all over the country, and they work for the president. This is an agency that basically puts to work what the president puts into place or plans for the year, and they help gather those proposals into a solidified budget. Okay, president composes that preliminary budget in conjunction with the OMB. So this process really does begin with the executive branch. But while that's happening, make no mistake, the Congress is also getting involved here. The CBO is the Congressional Budget Office, and they, from a constituent standpoint, go back to the districts and pick out plans. They evaluate current spending. They put together a parallel plan, both of which comprise draft budgets for the year. So you've got the OMB working for the president 18 years out, collecting information. The CBO is doing the same thing. It's the CBO that usually will put together a report on the effect of spending approaches that different presidents come up with. So they basically test the ideas that the OMB comes up with. So you may hear either one of them involved with a budget process at any point in the year. Eventually, those plans go into what we call a Congressional Appropriation Committee. This is where the final decisions are made on what to fund and what to get rid of as part of the budget for the year. And it can be a political process that drags on and on and on. One note here, guys, if you really want to check up on what your politicians are doing, this is where they put the money where their mouth is. You can have a politician sign a spending plan that supports education, right? But if they pass it through with no funding in the appropriations process, it gives you a really good test of whether or not they believe what they're saying. Obviously, an unfunded mandate for something like education or the Department of Housing or whatever basically really won't fly or have very much merit. So this is a part of the process that most voters forget to check up on. So definitely follow what your congressional representatives are suggesting and doing in this part of the process. But once we get through appropriations, bills are finalized. What that means, guys, is this carries the weight of law. The federal budget is a spending plan, and we really can't deviate from it without additional action from Congress. So this is very much a lawmaking process. The budget, when it's approved by both houses of Congress, is sent back to the president, and he has that option at that point to veto or sign it into law. So you can see at any point along the way, if there's a political, ideological problem where Democrats or Republicans disagree with one another, they can basically take this process hostage. So it's something that we kind of hold our breath for and hope goes well so that we know what the federal budget is going to be all about in the new year. This is a flow chart that shows you the process, and it's colorized to show you what part is OMB, what part is congressional, and what part is done by the president himself. So if you follow that process out, then you understand probably a little bit better why this takes so long to do. Basically, it's an elaborate process where you have a lot of different steps, and it starts here on the left. So if you follow the activity of the OMB, it kind of goes in this fashion. This is the handoff where the president submits his draft to both houses of Congress, and you can kind of see there's a parallel track, right? One track that goes through the House, one track that goes through the Senate. Here are appropriations committees. And at this point, we really have two plans. We've got to get those plans together in conference committee and make sure that we have one unified plan. So this is the part of your chart that probably takes the longest. Eventually, House approves it, Senate approves it, and goes back to the president where we can sign that into law. So this might be a visual that's a little bit more helpful. I've also uploaded a document that I just recently found that might be helpful, and it's on Canvas as a download for you to PDF. It kind of narrates this a little bit better and shows you how we go from the executive branch all the way to the finished approved spending plan for the year. So if you're interested, you have access to this document too. When we get that budget, what we're going to find is what the president and Congress intend for the broader economy. Basically, it will either be expansionary or contractionary. Let me show you what an expansionary budget would entail. Typically, in a situation like we find ourselves in now, with COVID crisis breaking out everywhere, unemployment rising, I bet the plans for the future budget are going to be expansionary. Now, that might change if we start seeing a rise of inflation and rising interest rates that pose a problem. So this could shift gears at any point. But for an expansionary economy or expansionary budget, then we're looking for things like tax cuts and increased government spending. So stimulus spending, for example, and refunds on people's taxes for the current year. That would probably show up as increased consumption and increased business investment spending. So that would move our AD curve forward. But if it's a contractionary economy, then we're going to see the opposite, where we see things like tax increases and decreased spending on government programs all over the budget. I want you to think about this. Politicians are really, really excited when they get the chance to do an expansionary budget where they cut taxes and increase government spending programs in their constituents' districts. But this takes a little bit more discipline, doesn't it? You basically have to realize that this is a criticism of the fiscal policy that comes out through the federal budget, because nobody likes to support increases in taxes and decreased spending on government programs. So there are some criticisms of the fiscal policy we need to talk about. Challenges to the fiscal policy that I've just been mentioning: timing or delayed results. Guys, you've got to do the right thing at the right time. And I'll remind you of some homework that you've seen lately. When we talked about AD and AS curves, we had one example, I think, in your homework where government made the situation worse. They cut taxes, increased spending, and I think that drove the level of AD up into range 3. So there are examples where politicians don't pay attention to basic economics, right? They've got to do the right thing at the right time. Predicting the future can always be a challenge. The federal budget, we plan that spending for 1 year. Here in Texas, we do it for 2 years. So you're literally asking politicians to look down the road and predict where spending is likely to be. And if, we're going to collect sales taxes or property taxes or income taxes at the level we were expecting to, we see budget problems and budget cuts all the time because predicting the future can be a real challenge. There are limits on what the government can and cannot spend. And you'll see that here in a couple of slides in the next video. We have 2 categories of spending. One is discretionary, and that suggests that the government can decide if they want to spend or if they don't want to spend for the year. And it's kind of a pay-as-you-go system where you make sure you have the spending to use on that particular item. And it changes from year to year, right? In the middle of the Iraq and Afghanistan war crisis, we were spending a lot on defense, but that could change now, for example, since we're not in the middle of those conflicts anymore. Mandatory spending is required by law. There's a law in the books that will have to be changed in order for you to change the amounts that are part of that spending program. And unfortunately, mandatory spending has become a larger percentage of our budget. So you'll see what problems that poses later. There are always 3 levels of government, guys. And just because the federal government adopts one policy doesn't mean that state and local governments have to get in line. So you could have 3 different objectives kind of competing with each other, watering down the effect of whatever fiscal policy the federal government comes up with. And of course, there's always this. I've not ever seen American government be so divided with no middle ground whatsoever. So it's highly likely that you'll see the federal budget process get hijacked at some point, just so somebody can make a point or press their ideology. So it's not a perfect process, but we're going to come back in the next video, guys, and talk about things you need to know about the federal budget. Words and terms like fiscal policy. So take a break, get a snack, come back, and I'll meet you right back here.